Last Sunday, after a long offseason, football was finally upon us. We're all likely excited for our fantasy teams and to see how our best players would do. And then they played, and it was awful. Let's take a look at just how bad this week was for some of our top picks. Here we can see the top 10 average draft picked players of this year and their week 1 performances. All information in this video uses PPR scoring and was gathered from Fantasy Pros rankings, so it may not match up perfectly to your league. But here you can see McCaffrey, Cook, Kamara, and Kelsey all performed pretty well. Most above that 19-point range, things that we're looking for our top 10 draft picks to do when they're playing. But we have 3 right around the 10-point range and 3 around 5 points. So what we're going to do is we're going to take a closer look at these 6 players and compare them to their past 3 years of playing. So here we are. We have our 6 top draft picks. Derrick Henry, Ezekiel Elliott, Devontae Adams, Aaron Jones, Saquon Barkley, and Austin Eckler. And 2 people that are well outside of that top 10 pick, but people who we expect consistency in their scoring. Aaron Rodgers, one of our top QBs, and then Julio Jones. So let's go ahead and check out our graph. So we have our weekly points here, and obviously each vertical line matches up with a different player. Each blue circle represents a different week or different game that they played over their last 3 years. Okay, the yellow represents their week 1 in 2021. As you can see, these are some surprisingly low scores from those we expect the most out of. We can go ahead and check out some of their other years. 2020, really strong year for Aaron Rodgers, right? Look at all these high scores, really not too much other than one game down here at the bottom. And Devontae Adams as well, that makes sense. He has some of his top scores over the last 3 years that they, were pairing off during Aaron Rodgers' MVP season. 2019 is pretty well spread for everybody. 2018, this is where Derrick Henry's, where a lot of his lower scores come in at the beginning of 2018. And same thing with Austin Eckler. So a lot of these low scores that you see when we zoom out and look at the whole thing, that's where a lot of their numbers that are lower than their, this week 1 score come into play. But what we're going to do now is we're going to go ahead and zoom in on 2 players in particular. And that is Aaron Rodgers and Saquon Barkley. So each of these 2 players only have a single game where they scored less than they did this past Sunday. This game for Rodgers, where he scores just 1 single point, is a game against Detroit in Week 17. Green Bay started Rodgers, even though winning got them nothing in Week 17 as they're prepping for the playoffs. On the first drive of the game, Rodgers took a hit big enough to knock his helmet off. He stayed in the game for the rest of the quarter, only completing 3 of 5 passes for 26 yards. By the start of the second quarter, he was out, taken to the locker room, never to come back. As for this one for Saquon, again, only 1 game worse than what he had performed this past week. He had 2.8 points. We should all know which game this is, unfortunately. Only 4 rushes into Week 2 last year against Chicago, Saquon suffered a season-ending torn ACL. He obviously didn't return that game, stopping him at just 2.8 fantasy points on 4 carries. So here it is. Saquon Barkley and Aaron Rodgers' only games worse than their performance this past week was 4 carries into a game before a season-ending ACL injury and what was likely a 1 single quarter of concussed football. And to make matters worse, this yellow game we have highlighted from this past week in 2021 was an entire game that they played. Yeah, you can maybe say Saquon was coming back from an ACL injury, but regardless, he's a top 10 average draft pick. We're expecting some points. So 3.7 and 3.32 isn't quite cutting it. Now, some of you might be able to, might be saying that, this might be kind of cherry picking, right? We're picking out the players who underperformed, even some of them outside of the top 10, and ignoring those who performed well, like McCaffrey, Cook, and Kelsey, all with 20 to 30 points. So what we're going to do now is we're going to take a look at the top 10 as a group. and compare them to other starting top 10 average draft picks from the last 4 years. So the number we're going to use is this right here, this 13.86, because that incorporates those who did well as those who performed poorly. So let's take a look at this next graph. All right, so this right here shows our average points per game of the top 10 draft picks each year, okay? So right here, the y-axis is your average points per game, okay? So we're counting by 5, 0, 5, 10, 15, 20, 25. The x-axis measures time. So in dark blue here, we have 17 dots for 17 weeks of the 2017 season. And we can scroll over them to kind of see the points, that their top 10 players had done. Let's go ahead and make it visible so we can see which top 10 were actually included in that year. All the way to the right, we have our red dot. This is 2021, the week that we've just passed that we've been focusing on for this video. And I've added a red baseline to kind of make it so it's easy to see how many games or how many weeks were worse than this past one that we just witnessed. And we can count them at 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Only 5 games that were worse than what we had witnessed just this past week over the last 4 years. Now, I'm sure we're all curious about this game down here from 2017, week 9, where everyone averaged at 6.92. That's right, 6.92 from some of these players right here, where we'd be honestly mad if just one of them scored a score like that. Honestly, we'd be mad if our second or third pick in the draft scored something like that. But not only did our top 10 get those scores, but everyone averaged a 6.92. Let's go ahead and dive into that a little deeper. All right, here they are. So to be fair, not all 10 were playing, okay? David Johnson and Odell Beckham were out injured, as they had been for most of the season. Le'Veon Bell, Antonio Brown, and Melvin Gordon are all on bye, so they're not playing either. Now, this doesn't hurt the score, right? This does not hurt their average, as this graph right here only factors playing players, starting players from the top 10 each given week, okay? So like, in Christian McCaffrey Christian McCaffrey in 2020, not playing really most of his games, or Saquon getting hurt after that second game. All those missed games he has does not bring these dots down, does not bring the average down. It's only starting players. And in 2021, note that all 10 players had played. So we only have 5 players here. All right, only 5 players who are starting. So a good or bad performance could really have a big impact on our average. All right, so let's go with our first one. Let's see. Julio Jones starts out strong, 18 points. Okay, that's right around the spot where we really expect our top 10 draft picks to get. We'll talk about our expected averages, expected scores soon with our next graph. But yeah, Julio Jones started out strong. So here we come up to LeSean McCoy. LeSean McCoy, really consistent back up to that point. He was averaging 19 points per game. Let's see what he got. That's right, a 2.5. He averaged just a 2.5. So here our average right now is at a 10.15. Let's jump down to Devontae Freeman. He had a 10.4. All right, he's holding the average pretty strong. Not a good score by any means, but he's holding the average strong. So that means Mike Evans and AJ Green must have had a catastrophic pair of games if they're going to bring this average from 10.2 down to the 6.9 that it appears to be. Let's check out what their scores were. And there it is, a 2.3 and a 1.6, bringing that average down for the top 10 players of that week, or of that, drafted for that year. I guess 5, because 5 were out, averaging a 6.92. Absolutely awful. So how did Mike Evans and AJ Green get a score so low in this week? And there it is, AJ Green ejected. Let's go ahead. There's some footage here that is honestly just totally worth seeing. Okay, and there it is. Boom. Throwing cuffs as well. Oh man, he's still going. All right, and there it is. By halftime, right, earlier, that might explain that 1.6. He's out. 1.6 still bad for a half or even a quarter, but he's out. Mike Evans, both 1 o'clock games. Both 1 o'clock games. He's got his own situation. Let's take a look at his. Boom. So, you know, that might explain the 2.3. I think it was 2.3. You know, if he was ejected too. Oh, but he wasn't. Mike Evans was not ejected for this. So, you know, maybe this was just a big distraction and he did perform poorly. Maybe he got benched. I doubt it. Well, Mike Evans and AJ Green coming up with a 2.3 and a 1.6, really bringing down this, you know, this week for a top 10. Really a sad week for our top 10s. So, anyway, let's get back to our graphs. So this definitely sheds some light, like I said, on this 6.9. So only 5 weeks over the last 4 years have been worse than this one that we had witnessed just a week ago for week 1 in 2021. But, you know, I want to take a look at this, right? So 2018 in particular, really a strong week, a strong year. Nothing, if we're using this, you know, this past week as a line of mediocrity, really nothing hit that point in 2018. And it's interesting because Le'Veon Bell didn't actually play a single snap, so he didn't contribute to any of this. So yeah, nothing really dropped down to that level of mediocrity. One thing I do want to bring up, you know, and some of us might be saying, or actually I mentioned it earlier, is that when you're hurt or when you're on a bye, it does not hurt your score, right? So Christian McCaffrey, him being out most of last season, same with Saquon Barkley, it does not bring these scores down. But what I did do is make another graph. Let's go ahead and delete these real quick. We'll bring them back in a second. So what I did, I took the same exact graph, left it at the top, and now I brought one in on the bottom as well. Okay? Where what happens is, if you had not played in a game because you were injured or whatever other reason, you got a 0 for that game. Okay? Buys don't hurt you. You know, this is only for the 16 games that the players can play in. All right? So just for instance, right here, 6.92. The game that we've been focusing on, this terrible, abysmal game. Remember that we had David Johnson and Odell Beckham were both out on injury. So this 6.9 drops down to a 4.9, right? They both had zeros involved in their, in that average for the week. So let's train our eyes real quick so we can, properly look at this. Take a look at the top, for the top one, the y-axis is 0, counts by 5s, 0, 5, 10, all the way up to 25. Same thing with our bottom graph. It counts by 5s up to 25. This baseline right here for our 2021 week 1 game is still 13.86. Same thing down here, okay? Because no players were injured. All 10 of our top 10 draft picks did play. So this baseline is still the same. So what we're really looking for is how much of these dots really drop down, into this gray area. So, 2017, some of them do drop down. We already pointed out this, this one that we've been focusing on did drop down. But 2018, one of the interesting things about 2018 is there's not too much drop off, right? Which is interesting because it really just wasn't a very injury-ridden season. If we look at these, you can mouse over them and you see there's 2 players out. There's actually, interesting enough, is that I mentioned Le'Veon Bell didn't play a single snap this whole season. So there's at least 1 player out, and that means 1-0, bringing it down all these averages. But the fact that they're all still well above this line of mediocrity we've been saying for week 1 of 2021, all except for this one right here. And then, yes, this one right here drops off for week 17, but this is a normal thing for week 17, as a lot of teams sit their starters in prep for the playoffs, right? So here we have 7 players out, so that explains that big drop off. That's 7 zeros being included in this average. We can see the same thing here in 2017, quite a drop off. 2019, it's actually pretty high for week 17. However, compared to the 2 weeks prior, that is quite a drop off. And then same thing in 2020. I mentioned how 2018 is very injury proof. Well, 2020 was very injury prone. Take a look at this drop off coming. Now that we're saying that, Saquon Barkley didn't play basically the whole season. Christian McCaffrey barely played in this season. Michael Thomas played less than half a season. Same with Joe Mixon, right? So that's a lot of zeros being added in here. As you see, 3 players, 4 players, all out. And then week 17, we got 6 players out, okay? So one other thing I want us to do is I'm going to add in the averages. Let's see here. We're going to add in an average here and an average here. All right, cool. So what we're looking at here, when our players are playing, right? We know they're playing. They're not necessarily injured. We're expecting them to get 19 points. Okay. Yes, we like them to get more. However, 19 points, if they're getting that's good. When they're playing, that's what we expect. However, at the beginning of a season, when we're drafting them, we don't know if they're going to be hurt or not, right? So if you include, like I said, those zeros in there, because Christian McCaffrey didn't average 19 points per game last season. Maybe when he played, he was about that high. But if you actually look at how many points he averaged per game, total, he only averaged like 5.6 games per season per game, 5.6 points per game because he was injured so much. So when we're first drafting them, we don't really know. So 15 points per game is really what you can see from the beginning of the season, what you expect from these players if you use this 4-year data. All right. So really, I would say between 15 points and 19 points is what we should be expecting our top 10 draft picks to really get. Obviously, we like if they get higher. And there is obviously a big difference between a top 1, 2, 3 player versus a 7 through 9 or 7 through 10 player, right? But yeah, that's it. So there it is, everybody. You witnessed one of the worst fantasy weeks in 4 years for our top 10 draft picks. So here's to hoping that we don't witness something again like this for at least another year. And if my next week opponent is watching this, what you should take away from this is that you should sit Christian McCaffrey. He's not going to do well. That's what this data is telling you. Go ahead and sit him.